Today is National Whistleblower Appreciation Day. And with so much backlash against the brave individuals willing to expose government and corporate corruption, it's never been more important to highlight the difficulties faced by whistleblowers. Which is exactly what Mikey, Huff, and Andy Roth of Project Censored are doing this week in Washington, while attending the annual Whistleblower Summit. They joined me earlier, and I first asked them what they thought about the U.S. Senate commemorating the bravery of whistleblowers on the exact same day Chelsea Manning was convicted for blowing the whistle on war crimes.
Well, it's a very interesting series of developments insofar as the government has a double standard surrounding whistleblowing. We have a Whistleblower Protection Act that's 25 years old. It is in the process of purportedly being strengthened, particularly by Senator Patrick Leahy, who announced yesterday a new proposal that would help protect metadata collection and so forth, particularly addressing the problems of Section 215 of the USA Patriot Act, which has been one of the most problematic, particularly for civil liberties groups. And so that's a positive development. But we're also, again, here, as you say, for the Whistleblower Summit, which highlights a lot of the problems that people have had over the years who have blown the whistle on corruption in government, corruption in the corporate sector. And of course, we know the Obama administration in particular has been particularly harsh on whistleblowers and people that are trying to get the truth to the public. So that's definitely a divided message. It is a double standard, forked tongue, so to speak. But we're here in town to support, again, the whistleblowers, and people can learn more at whistleblowersummit.com. And we've been working with some other great organizations like Government Accountability Project and so on, and they like to highlight a lot of the positive developments that are coming out of this week's proceedings.
And Andy, you know, a lot of other media organizations kind of take the unbiased, I guess you could say, perspective, where they say, you know, they're treading this careful line where they don't want to go out and support or blanketly demonize them, which is kind of, you see a lot of the latter. But why does Project Censored take a different route where you guys say, you know, we're embracing whistleblowers?
Yeah, well, I think there's kind of several steps to that answer. But if you just start with the idea of government secrecy is harmful to national interests. It's harmful to government accountability, as Mikey was just mentioning. It's harmful to the public's right to know in a democracy about what's being done in our name. So whistleblowers, by contrast, are combating secrecy. They're speaking out against that silencing effect in a way that allows the public to know, and hopefully, in the case of governmental whistleblowers, holds the government to account. And similar things could be said in terms of corporate whistleblowers and corporate whistleblowing. So this has led us, I think, quite naturally to, just as a matter of course, say these are important stories that the corporate media, by and large, are doing a poor to non-existent job of covering. And that's exactly our mandate at Project Censored, is to draw attention to the stories in the independent press and the work of independent journalists, to bring forward those stories and to give perspective that's not available in the corporate media.
This show's actually been blanketly demonized in all the content that I broach on the show because it happens to be hosted on this network. Do you think the extra focused scrutiny on RT is warranted, considering the utter abysmal failure and state of all media in broadcast?
Well, you know, as someone both as director of Project Censored and someone that is a professor and teaches critical thinking and social science, I think it's really important to focus on the arguments and the facts that are presented. If we were going to sit back and attack a particular news organization, carte blanche, right, that would then mean that we're somehow saying that everything that happens on that network is exactly the same. And that's simply not true. While we criticize the New York Times and we criticize NPR and we criticize Fox News and so forth, we also admit in our publications and we acknowledge when people at those organizations do good work, right? Whether it's James Risen at the New York Times, who's under assault, right, for his First Amendment press rights and protecting sources. You know, but then in the next sentence, we could say that the New York Times has had abysmal reporting on issues of Israel and so forth, and leading up to the Iraq War. So I think it's interesting that your show in particular has been singled out, because I find that it happens to be one of the more accurately sourced programs on the network. again, we could get into other critiques of this network, just like we could with any. But I say focus on the story, focus on the facts, and get the personalities out of the news and out of the stories, because that's a distraction and a diversion from the issues that really matter to the public.
And what I love about Project Censored, it's kind of going into what you're just saying, is this kind of label of a conspiracy theorist when you don't want to dissect the actual facts and stories that you guys are really hitting upon. And of course, I was thrown into the mix with the whole RT fervor as a conspiracy theorist simply because I question official narratives. I wanted to get your opinion on this, Mickey. Notorious weapons of mass destruction liar, straight up war propagandist David Frum, given a senior editor position at The Atlantic, claims that the photos of the Gaza massacre are a hoax. Ultimately, of course, he was forced to give a half-assed apology. Yet I'm the conspiracy theorist. He's the one who still has a platform in the mainstream media.
Yeah, well, we'd call it the corporate media, right? And that certainly belies their bias. The corporate media is in bed with the military-industrial complex and the state in the U.S. and is very much a top-down managed news type structure that supports U.S. NATO empire and expansion. Anything that questions or challenges that, of course, is cast aside. Anyone that challenges and questions official narratives is attacked and called names. Conspiracy theorist is a favorite dating back to the 60s when the CIA originally hatched the term. But there is a great, again, another double standard is that on the right, it seems that conspiracy theories can run wild and get picked up by corporate media. Benghazi, I'm sorry, I had Tourette's. But, you know, you can do those kind of things. But whenever there's an actual series of questions about serious topics, it just gets cast aside. And over at the New York Times, they'll just rewrite headlines if they don't want to talk about 4 dead children on the beach in Gaza and so forth. So, I mean, there's a remarkable double standard. And I think, once again, a way of cutting through that is through critical thinking and media literacy, where you can ask questions, look for transparent sources, and come to your own conclusions. And the job of the free press is to do that for the public.
Absolutely, and that's what you guys are doing so well, Andy. Speaking of Gaza, I wanted to play you guys an outrageous clip from Wolf Blitzer on CNN.
From what you know, what was the purpose of this tunnel?
Attack soldiers. They won't attack regular people, children, women, men.
They wanted to go in, attack, kill Israelis,
Yes.
but also kidnap Israelis.
Yes.
That was one of the rationales that Israelis have suggested was one of the purposes of these tunnels.
Yes.
I mean, Andy, here you have him literally leading the interviewee, saying, no, aren't these tunnels used to kidnap children and kill Israelis? I mean, we know, of course, sure, horrible things may have happened in those tunnels, but also they're used to smuggle food, bring KFC, fast food, and also smuggle people out into Egypt because the borders are closed. Why is agitprop against Palestinians so prevalent across the corporate media?
Well, I mean, I think we see this as, you know, this is a case in its own right, but it's part of a larger pattern. And what we see in the corporate media on a regular basis, this is well documented not only at Project Censored, but in almost all the sociological studies of news and news production. The corporate news relies on a narrow range of official sources for its information, for its perspective. And that spectrum is, as I say, quite narrow. So Wolf Blitzer standing in the tunnel with the representative of the IDF or whoever that is, that's one version of what's happening there, of course. All right, the key is it's one version. And, you know, the problem, I think, there is that would we have a later section with Wolf Blitzer where he's standing in the, you know, on the beach?
Right.
Or in the hospital yard among the shelled rubble, talking to the victims? No, by and large not. They're unofficial. They don't have a status. Mickey and I were getting coffee and a bagel before the summit yesterday morning, and we caught a little bit of the CNN coverage. The headline for the CNN coverage, or the label for it, is it's the Israel-Hamas conflict. The Palestinian people are literally written out of the very headline or the frame in which the story is being told.
When is CNN going to announce Wolf Blitzer and his former connections to AIPAC, for example? Yet at NBC and MSNBC, there is talk about taking reporters off of cases because they were factually reporting the slaughter that was taking place of children in Gaza, and somehow they were biased, right, for reporting reality. And that's an incredible double standard that also ought to be pointed out, certainly in the corporate media in the U.S.
And I love what you said about framing and bias, because I think when you look at media censorship, the framing is taken out of that equation. You say, oh, well, I read about that in the New York Times, I read about it, or I saw it on CNN. It doesn't mean that you're getting the full story, and the context of this conflict is completely missing. And I mean, even in Israel, you have Haaretz, you have 972 Mag, way more realistic about what's going on the ground, the reality that's going on the ground. Why are Americans presented such a dumbed-down, simplistic narrative compared to the rest of the world, what do you think that's doing to our societal evolution, Mickey?
Well, dovetailing from what Andy just said, it's systemic. It's a systemic slant. It isn't just on the issue of Israel, right? It's on a whole host of issues. It's on what's happening in the Ukraine. It's on U.S.-NATO issues. It's on, GMOs. It's on a lot of this, on climate change. I mean, there's great bias and slant that comes about through framing. And the dumbing down problem is problematic because this is top-down managed news that's designed to shape public opinion by narrowing the scope of perspective.
And of course, the American public can't stand up to the fact that we're giving over $3 billion a year to Israel, because if we did, that might cause some changes there. Did you want to add something?
Right, but if the public, I think it's something to be very clear at Project Censored. Our stance is not that the American public is somehow inherently incapable of grasping these ideas or handling the truth, right? The idea is that most of the American public is dependent on the media content of 5 or 6 major corporations, depending on how you identify those mega entities, and what they're fed is very poor. So it would be like criticizing me for being a slow runner when you feed me a diet of nothing but junk food. I'm not getting the nourishment I need in order to be the strong, capable person that I am. And I think that's the situation with the American public.
You guys are the definition of grassroots. You've built your organization from the bottom up. You encompass so many different colleges to get these stories generated every year. And of course, you're doing things on a daily basis as well. Where do you see the corporate media structure in 10 years? And how can people get involved with such an amazing project that you guys are focused on?
Part of what we try to do at Project Censored is say, yes, there is a lot more. It can be overwhelming to process what is there. But here are these validated independent news stories that have been researched and vetted and documented by faculty and students at our 24 affiliate campuses, colleges and universities across the country where Project Censored's work is being done. And we want to point people to that, and we want to lift up and provide a platform for the general public to say, here are stories. If you're concerned about the Ukraine, here are stories that aren't going to get primetime coverage, but are valid and important and worth your knowing about.
That's what we pride ourselves as doing, is highlighting the good work of intrepid journalists and truth tellers all over that speak truth to power and know that speaking truth is power. And again, we're honored to be doing that for 38 years, and we'll unfortunately have to keep doing that until more and more media supplant and just entirely replace corporate media, which is entirely irrelevant to the population at large.
Complete honor to have both of you on. Mickey, Huff, Andy Lee, Roth, thank you so much, both of you, for coming on.
Thank you, Abby.
Earlier, and I first asked them what they thought about the U.S. Senate commemorating the bravery of whistleblowers on the exact same day Chelsea Manning was convicted for blowing the whistle on war crimes.
Well, it's a very interesting series of developments insofar as the government has a double standard surrounding whistleblowing. We have a Whistleblower Protection Act that's 25 years old. It is in the process of purportedly being strengthened, particularly by Senator Patrick Leahy, who announced yesterday a new proposed
perspective where they say, they're treading this careful line where they don't want to go out and support or blanketly demonize them, which is kind of, you see a lot of the latter. But why does Project Censored take a different route where you guys say, we're embracing whistleblowers?
Yeah, well, I think there's kind of several steps to that answer. But if you just start with the idea of government secrecy is harmful to national interests. It's harmful.
And people that are trying to get the truth to the public. So that's definitely a divided message. It is a double standard, forked tongue, so to speak. But we're here in town to support, again, the whistleblowers, and people can learn more at whistleblowersummit.com. And we've been working with some other great organizations like Government Accountability Project and so on. And they like to highlight a lot of the positive developments that are coming out of this week's proceedings.
And Andy, a lot of other media organizations kind of take the unbiased, I guess you could say. Today is National Whistleblower Appreciation Day. And with so much backlash against the brave individuals willing to expose government and corporate corruption, it's never been more important to highlight the difficulties faced by whistleblowers, which is exactly what Mickey, Huff, and Andy Roth of Project Censored are doing this week in Washington while attending the annual Whistleblower Summit. They join me.
That would help protect metadata collection and so forth, particularly addressing the problems of Section 215 of the USA Patriot Act, which has been one of the most problematic, particularly for civil liberties groups. And so that's a positive development. But we're also, again, here, as you say, for the Whistleblower Summit, which highlights a lot of the problems that people have had over the years who have blown the whistle on corruption in government, corruption in the corporate sector. And of course, we know the Obama administration in particular has been particularly harsh on whistleblowers.